The Great Depression was the worst economic crisis of the century. More than 13 million people were unemployed. Farmers lost crops from all the drought that had happened during the Dust Bowl. The stock market crash of the 1929 was the unequal distribution of the wealth was what caused the Great Depression. There was no middle class during the unequal distribution of wealth. During the stock market crash, many stocks were purchased and the prices of the stocks fell, and a majority of the money was lost. In result to both the stock market and unequal distribution of wealth, there were many families that had filed for unemployment, lost of their homes. It was known as the most depressing period of history.
Herbert Hoover, America's 31st president, took office in 1929, the year the U.S. economy plummeted into the Great Depression. Hoover bore much of the blame in the minds of the American people. As a result, Hoover was soundly defeated in the 1932 presidential election by Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt, America's 32nd president, the only president to be elected 4 times. Roosevelt led the United States through the Great Depression as well as World War II. Roosevelt greatly expanded the powers of the federal government through a series of programs and reforms known as the New Deal and the Second New Deal. The first 100 days, Roosevelt acted swiftly to, he said, wage a war against the emergency, just as though we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. First, he shored up the national banks. The New Deal was a series of domestic programs enacted in the United States between 1933 and 1938, and a few that came later. They included both laws passed by Congress as well as presidential executive orders during the first term of President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Second New Deal, Roosevelt called for 5 major goals: improved use of national resources, security against old age, unemployment and illness, and slum clearance, as well as a national welfare program, the WPA, to replace state relief efforts. During the early 1930s, the ratification of the 18th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors, ushered a period in American history known as the Prohibition. The result of a widespread temperance movement during the first decade of the 20th century, Prohibition was difficult to enforce despite the passage of companion legislation known as the Volstead Act.
During the Great Depression, most families lived in the United States struggled on a day-to-day basis with things such as money and being able to provide for their families. To provide for their children during the Great Depression, families had to become self-sufficient. With farmers growing varieties of their gardens, families learned to eat on one-dish suppers and eating with the people of their church to help share food and keep their hopes up and hearts full. On the small amounts of money brought wives and women to stretch their food budgets, baking their own bread and canning everything from beef to garden vegetables. As women stayed home, they sewed and mended their own clothing and also made soup from lard. To keep busy and distracted from their daily difficulties and the struggles with money and food, with the small amounts of any left to spare on entertainment, most families paired with other neighbors and played board games or listened to the radio stations such as Amos and Andy, soap operas, and sporting events to keep themselves occupied. The American dream during the 1930s can best be summed up as the search for necessities and the pursuit of happiness. September 1st, 1939 started the beginning of the Second World War as Hitler invaded Poland, causing Great Britain and France to declare war against Germany. Throughout the 6 years of war, an estimated 45 to 60 million people were killed, and 6 million of them being Jews murdered by Nazis in Hitler's plan called the Final Solution, or better known to us as the Holocaust. The United States was first brought into the World War on December 7, 1941, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, causing necessities to be rationed and women to become employed to help us as electricians and welders in defense plants. This helped pull us out of the Great Depression into the following decades with baby boomers and a time of peace with no war.